Thank you. Welcome, everyone. My name is Gladys Rama. I'm the editorial director, and I'm so pleased to welcome you today to our Real-World Ransomware Defense and Remediation Summit brought to you by Rubrik. The editorial staff of Virtualization and Cloud Review and RedmondMag.com have worked really hard to bring some of the best independent experts on this topic for today's event, so we really hope that you enjoy it. Before we start today's event with the first of these three great sessions, we do have a couple of announcements. First, this event is being recorded and will be available to you for future viewing. You'll get an email from us when the replay is available, generally within the next couple of days. Second, each of today's three sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A, so please be sure to put your questions into the Q&A box as soon as they come up, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Third, during today's third session, we are giving away an ultimate stainless steel home brewery kit, but you must be present to win, so be sure to stay on for the entire event. And finally, we do have resources from our sponsor today, Rubrik, that are available on the console for you right now. So please do download and check those out. It's because of Rubrik underwriting this content that we can bring you this summit. So we really thank them for sponsoring the summit and supporting this community. And we ask you to check those out so that we can bring you more events like this in the future. Now on to the first session of today's summit. This one's called 2023 Ransomware Threat Outlook, and it features intelligence analyst Alan Liska. Besides being a regular presenter here with our summits, Alan has also appeared on PBS NewsHour, CNN, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and has been quoted in Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and the New York Times, among others. He has written many articles about ransomware and co-wrote the book on it, actually, Ransomware Defending Against Digital Extortion. He's also the author of The Practice of Network Security, Building an Intelligence-Led Security Program, and Securing NTP, a Quick Start Guide. And he's also the co-author of DNS Security, Defending the Domain Name System. Alan, it's so happy to have you back. Please take it away.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Gladys. And thank you all for being here today. Great to have everybody here. I really love these events. And please, if you have questions, please get them in. For me, the best part of this is the questions we get from you all, because I think that really gets into much more nuanced discussion. But as Gladys said, my name is Alan Liska. I am a reluctant ransomware researcher for a company called Recorded Future, and now written 2 books on ransomware. My second book, the Ransomware Understand, Prevent, Recover, is now in its 2nd edition. Unfortunately, it hasn't stopped ransomware, so I don't know if anybody should actually buy the book, but I do appreciate all the people who have. So let's start with where we are so far in 2023. There are a lot of articles, if you go back to January of 2023, where people talked about how ransomware is probably on the decline, how the number of attacks had decreased in 2022 versus 2021. And it appears that all of the ransomware groups said, hold my vodka, and it's decided to go ahead and accelerate their attacks. So if you look at the number of victims posted to data leak sites or extortion sites in the first quarter of 2022 versus the first quarter of 2023, you can see that there's a 27% increase. Now, there are a couple of mitigating factors in there. In the first quarter of 2022, one of the biggest ransomware groups in the world, the Conti ransomware group, was undone by its own hubris, let's say. They had pledged full-throated support of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and a Ukrainian researcher got pissed off and decided to leak all of their secret documents, which was amazing for us as researchers, bad for Conti. So we did see a disruption in attacks in the first quarter of 2022 that obviously we haven't seen replicated in 2023. The other thing, and we'll talk about this shortly, is in the first quarter of 2023, we also saw the use of a 0-day by the Clop ransomware group to go after the Go Anywhere file sharing tool, which did accelerate the attacks, but it doesn't account for the full number. So if you look in here as to which groups have been most active in the first quarter of 2023, Clock only accounts for about 8% of those attacks. So it doesn't really explain the difference. It's just literally there are more ransomware attacks going on. The big, most active ransomware groups right now are Lockbit, AlpD, also known as Black Cat. We see Royal Ransomware being active. We see a little bit of Blackbite, a little bit of Black Basta, some Bien, which is an extortion-only group, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. And then Play Ransomware is another one. What's interesting, if you look at Play Ransomware, and if you look at some of these others like Bien, some of these newer groups don't operate using the ransomware as a service model. So the way that ransomware has really accelerated their growth in the last couple of years is through essentially an affiliate model, where bad guy sets up ransomware and says, all right, I have this great ransomware infrastructure. I'm going to go ahead and rent it out to others. So you pay a fee, you get your own ransomware executable, and then you go deploy ransomware in whatever targets, wherever you want, and the ransomware operator handles kind of the negotiations and the payment and the laundering of the money, and then gives you your cut. Think of it like multi-level marketing for bad guys. But this is, this is one of those things where that's been really successful and really prompted the growth of ransomware over the last couple of years. Really, since 2019, a lot of the growth has been driven by this RAS model. The problem has been with the RAS model, with the ransomware as a service model, is when the groups get too big, something takes them down. Whether you're talking Revo, whether you're talking Conti, whether you're talking DarkSide, Hive, whatever these different ransomware groups are, the ransomware as a service model, when it gets really big, whether it's law enforcement, whether it's internal fighting, again, whether it's a pissed off Ukrainian researcher, something comes in and kind of tears these groups apart. So some of these newer groups are avoiding that model entirely. It's just, a dude and 3 or 4 of his buddies who, drink vodka and do ransomware all day. So they won't have quite as many victims, but they also manage to fly under the radar of a lot of researchers and a lot of law enforcement that way. So we'll see whether or not that still continues. You're not going to make hundreds of millions of dollars like Lockbit has, but unfortunately you can still make millions of dollars doing that. So there is some incentive for there, especially if it means you won't have a target on your back the way a lot of the bigger groups do. Who's being hit by ransomware? If you look at the chart, everybody's being hit by ransomware. We like to want to, put things into nice little segments and say, oh yeah, no, the ransomware actors are going after this or this or this. They're going after everybody they can get their hands on. If you listen and talk to any ransomware actor, and if you read some of the interviews that some of these ransomware actors have done, they will tell you they don't care who the victim is. They just want the money. And so they're just looking for which industries are the most vulnerable. They don't actually care about, where, who they're hitting, as long as it's vulnerable and it's not going to take that much effort to deploy the ransomware. We are still seeing a lot of activity in the manufacturing sector. That is one of those areas where there just isn't a lot of investment in security, and so unfortunately manufacturers tend to be relatively easy targets. The same thing if you look at healthcare, which accounts for 5.8% in the bottom left-hand corner here. If you look at education, which accounts for 5.9% of victimology, again, not a lot of investment in security there. Construction is another industry right under education that that's gotten a lot of attention. And actually, we're seeing some legal services and law firms that have also started to be hit pretty often, especially if you look in places like South America. We're seeing kind of more of that. We're seeing more of those groups being hit down there. So again, broadly, no industry is safe. Some seem to be less safe than others, but I never ever want to say that, oh, hey, these are being targeted, because it is not that they're being targeted. It is just that there's less investment in security, so some of these networks may be more vulnerable. The something new that we've seen in 2023 that we really haven't seen since 2017 is mass exploitation events tied to ransomware. So the first one we saw, which was in February, started in January, but really picked up in February, was what we call the ESXi ARGS ransomware. It exploited a vulnerability in the ESXi OpenSLP servers. This was a known vulnerability that just hadn't been patched. And what we saw was, the ransomware actor just doing a mass scanning and then deploying it. This is also where we start to see something interesting, and that I don't think I'm going to talk about too much today, but I do want to mention briefly. We're really starting to see the rise of what I call Franken ransomware. And if you're a pedantic in the comments and you want to say, well, technically it should be Frankenstein's monsters ransomware, that's just too hard to say. So we're going to call it Franken ransomware for now. But what that is there's been so much leaked ransomware code out there. So the Clock ransomware code has been leaked. Chaos ransomware code has been leaked. The Lockbit ransomware code has been leaked. The Revo ransomware code has been leaked. There have been dozens of ransomware codes leaked. So a lot of what we see as new ransomware is really just taking that leaked code and making it your own, or taking parts of that leaked code and kind of bolting it together to build something new. And ESXi was a great example of that. It used the encryption algorithm from one ransomware. It used the ransom note from another ransomware, and kind of used that to build, kind of an ugly ransomware monster that it then unleashed on the world. And in fact, when the first iteration of attacks were quickly able to be restored because there was a flaw in the encryption mechanism used, they then grabbed the second ransomware, added that code in, and then the second wave of attacks were much more effective at actually encrypting. Which is also why, if you have any exposed systems out there, really, really important to prioritize patching those systems, because this was a known vulnerability that had been around for 6 months or so, and yet there were still there still wound up being thousands of victims. I think the last count I saw was almost 4,000 victims of this ransomware, just people who hadn't gotten around to patching yet, and unfortunately that left them vulnerable for this attack. The second one that we've talked briefly about already is the Clock ransomware, which exploited a vulnerability in the Go Anywhere file transfer protocol or file transfer server. This was in particular unusual because it did use a 0 day. It's not the first time that we've seen ransomware actors use 0 days. The Revo ransomware did the same thing with Kaseya back in 2021. So ransomware actors have money, and they're willing to use the money to buy 0 days to take advantage of kind of easy targets. And again, Clop was a great example of one of those where they either found or purchased a 0 day and then used that to launch a mass attack. More than 130 victims using that Go Anywhere. At least 130 victims, according to Clop's numbers. So far, we've seen definitive reports of 70 victims. Clop's claiming 130. We'll eventually, hopefully, we'll figure out what the real number is. So the fact that ransomware actors are using these mass exploitation campaigns, whether it's through known vulnerabilities or through acquired 0 days, is absolutely a concern, and it's kind of a change in tactics, something we haven't seen. And certainly two in the first quarter, two mass exploitations like this in one quarter is a troubling sign if we see more of that going forward. We're also seeing more ransomware actors go after systems other than Windows. We've already talked about ESXi, but ESXi is a real focus for ransomware groups. So once they get in a network and they deploy ransomware to all the Windows machines, they will also try and find passwords and get into the ESXi systems and the Linux systems and deploy ransomware there, because they know that you're much more likely to pay a ransom if they can hold your ESXi servers hostage. In particular, one of the super concerning things about the ESXi ransomware is that a lot of the decryptors don't work on the ESXi simply because you're dealing with such large files. So, if they encrypt all the VMs on your ESXi server and that VM is, 4 gigs or more, you may not be able to decrypt it using the ransomware actor provided decryptor. Some incident response companies can write decryptors using the key to better handle that, but sometimes it just breaks. It depends on how the encryption's done, et cetera. Well, we are also seeing more ransomware attacks against Macs, though what we are not seeing is mass ransomware attacks. So these are single machine attacks rather than taking out a whole network. I've joked before that one of the best ways that you can protect your network from a mass ransomware attack is switching to all Macs, and everybody tells me that's not practical, so I won't mention it anymore. But as of right now, that would work. It's not that Macs can't be hit with a mass ransomware attack. It's just there's so many Windows systems out there right now that ransomware actors aren't going to bother. If they see all Macs, they're going to go find another target. So again, but that interest is in going after these other systems is there with the ransomware groups, and something that you need to be thinking about as you're securing your network. We're also seeing ransomware actors getting better at using cloud services such as AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. This is a great article. I highly recommend reading it from Lorenzo at TechCrunch. Just really, really good insight into the recent attack on Western Digital. In particular, the way that the ransomware actor was able to get in was they exploited vulnerabilities in the Microsoft Azure tenant. So they were able to get into Microsoft Azure, and then that gave them access essentially to the entire, Western Digital's entire cloud infrastructure, which they were able to use to steal data. So, a pretty serious problem. And again, with so many organizations moving so much of their infrastructure to the cloud, it's really important to understand exactly what kind of securities you have in place, what kind of security you have in place, and ensuring that you're keeping up to date with patches for your Azure, your AWS, and your Google Cloud systems, but also take advantage of some of the security tools that are out there that AWS and Azure in particular provide for their clients, because those extra layers of protection can be really important. We're still seeing ransomware actors focusing on extortion-only attacks. The two leaders right now we see, Kirakurt and Bianlin, are the two that are really focused on extortion only. So that is, the first part of the attack is the same, where the ransomware actor gets in the network, steals all the data, and then, but instead of encrypting everything, they just take the stolen data, leave the network, and use that stolen data as the ransom. Basically, it's held hostage. If you don't want us to leak your data, pay us money. Here's the thing, and here's why some of these attacks are. It's questionable whether or not this model will be profitable. Nobody rightfully believes that ransomware actors actually do delete the data. They'll send you an image. Oh, look at us. We secure deleted your data. We know they are lying bastards. They are taking that data and likely reselling it in underground forums or giving it to initial access brokers if there are any credentials that were stolen, et cetera. That data will be used. So what you are paying when you are paying the extortionist is you're paying not to have your data posted to the data leak site. That data will eventually find its way into other uses. And I think most victims are aware of that. So we don't see a lot of payments out of there compared to other types of ransomware. But it is still something that the ransomware actors like because it's easier and it's faster to get in and out. So they prefer that. We also, along with that, we are seeing what appears to be a slowdown in ransom reports. Chainalysis, a blockchain analysis firm, did a really great report earlier this year looking at the number of ransomware payments in 2022. And not only were ransom payments overall down by their analysis, but the number of transactions were also down. So fewer payments and fewer people paying, which is great. But that means that ransomware groups are now getting more aggressive in their extortion tactics. So we see things like Lockbit now posts all the negotiations from from victims that wind up not paying with them in an attempt to embarrass the victims. And then we see, especially schools, ransomware actors will email parents of children saying, we're going to release all your kids' stuff because your school won't pay. Kind of classic victim blaming, like it's your fault that we're evil people, essentially blaming the school for not paying them, and that's why your kid's data is going to be exposed forever. We also saw just less than a month ago, one ransomware group released pictures of breast cancer patients that were stolen from a hospital. And again, same thing. The ransomware actors blame the hospital for not paying rather than doing the honorable thing and killing themselves for being ransomware actors. Or maybe that's a little harsh, but I don't have any sympathy for people that knock over hospitals and schools and then post sensitive data from those attacks. So that's kind of the other thing we've got to watch out for right now is as these extortion, as fewer victims are paying, the ransomware actors are absolutely going to get more aggressive and find new ways to be, evil in terms of, releasing sensitive data and coercing victims to pay. So we're going to kind of switch tones a little bit. I know that was pretty dark, but any of you that are older than like 30, hopefully you know who Jeff Foxworthy is and kind of his famous bit, "You might be a redneck if." Well, one of the things that Victoria asked me to do for this, Victoria and Gladys asked me to do for this was, what are kind of some of the signs that you've been hit with a ransomware attack? And there are two ways I can go when I hear the word signs. I can go, "You might be a redneck if," or I can sing the song, signs everywhere. There are signs, but nobody wants to hear me sing. So we're going to go with the Jeff Foxworthy theme of things that are indicators that you have a ransomware attack. And the big one that I think a lot of people ignore is you likely have really good security tools in your network that will detect a lot of the ransomware activity that we're going to talk about as we go through here. And so one of the first things that a ransomware actor does when they land on the network is they shut down those security tools. So they they don't want your endpoint detection running. They don't want your if you have EDR, they don't want your EDR running. So every ransomware actor that I've seen has scripts that go ahead and shut that down. And most organizations that I've helped with ransomware incident response have those shutdowns in the log, but then didn't do anything about it. And so that's one of the first things that I like to tell people, hey, if something shuts down if a third-party tool or script or whatever shuts down your endpoint detection, go investigate that. That's probably somebody doing something bad. So that should be a high priority alert. And again, that's a relatively easy one because you're already getting those logs. You already get the alert, hey, this thing was shut down by a third-party tool. Not, oh, this machine turned off for the night, but, something else shut this down. Let's go investigate that. That should be a high priority alert because that is probably some sort of malicious activity. We also, and I apologize, this chart is reversed, but we're also seeing more reliance on loaders from the different ransomware groups. So we can directly see a pattern here of, if you look at the bottom, these are Quackbot campaigns, and then these are Black Bosta infections at the top of the chart. So we directly see, oh, hey, there are a whole bunch of Quackbot infections, and then there are a whole bunch of Black Bosta ransomware attacks. So this is, and this is a repeated pattern over and over again that we see where we see these big loader campaigns, and then we see whatever ransomware is associated with that. So having an early warning system that, oh, hey, there's a bunch of Quackbot activity, but ideally, oh, hey, we detected Quackbot in our network, let's start looking for tools that ransomware actors may have. And yes, there's a little bit of a delay there, and that's because the initial access broker, in this case, the team behind Quackbot, has to get firm admin access, or at least firm access into the network, and then hand it off to the ransomware team, and money has to be traded and so on and so forth. So watch for the signs of those early loaders in your network, because that could be a sign that a ransomware attack is following. Also looking for Cobalt Strike and Virtualization beacons. Almost every ransomware campaign these days either uses Cobalt Strike or Virtualization. There's some that still rely on what we call living off the land and don't use these loaders, but they are so very, very popular right now. So, for example, there are a lot of great lists right now because we know what these look like. We at Recorded Future, Palo Alto, Mandiant, every major security company is scanning the internet looking for signs of Cobalt Strike and Virtualization command and control infrastructure, and pulling in those lists of IPs and domains and sharing that with their clients. So really important, and this was just a snapshot of a 24-hour period where we saw 500 of the new ones of these pop up. So really important to be looking at that data and then analyzing your firewall logs to say, oh, hey, are there any, is any of our traffic going to any of these known beacons? But also to keep that updated, because these beacons come up and then they go down pretty quickly. So it's not like this is a years-long thing. This is a week-long thing at best. So you want to make sure you're always updating the list with the latest detections of Cobalt Strike and Virtualization beacons, and then looking for that traffic in your network. The other thing that I don't see a lot of organizations do that you probably could do more of is PowerShell logging. Again, ransomware actors rely heavily on PowerShell, especially the affiliates for the ransomware as a service operators, because often the ransomware as a service operators will provide some pre-made PowerShell scripts. So great, I can use these PowerShell scripts. I don't have to think too much. So looking for PowerShell activity that is unusual to your network is really important. But in order to do that, you have to be logging. And I know it sucks. It's easy for me to stand up here and say, you have to have a new log source. It's going to cost you another $20,000 a year with Splunk or whatever. But it really is important, and there's a lot of value you can get out of those. Look for PowerShell scripts that disable admin accounts, create new PowerShell scripts, any new PowerShell scripts. PowerShell scripts running at odd times. Ransomware actors love to work Friday evening and Saturday evening because they know there's fewer people in security there. But basically, this is where you have to know your network, and any kind of PowerShell script that's doing something unusual for your organization, that's where you want to kind of step up and go, we should go ahead and investigate this and find out what's going on. And it also means if you're in security, working closely with your Windows admin teams, find out what PowerShell scripts are already there. Build that baseline, and then it's easier to find things that are unusual. Hey, this is a new script. We've never seen it run before. Let's go ahead and investigate. Oh, this is Dan. Dan's doing something new. Okay, that's great. And having that regular communication with your Windows admins makes this kind of role easier. Again, we talked a little bit about how ransomware actors like to live. Some of them like to live off the land, so they like to use Windows commands only to move around the system. So who am I? Task list, system info, ID config. These are common Windows commands run by ransomware groups. PsExec, if that's in your network, ransomware actors love to use PsExec. So tracking these kind of repeated commands, everybody may use one or two of these commands throughout the day, or not everybody. Most people don't even know how to touch the command line of Windows, but you may see one or two of these run. But running these commands in order, 3 or 4 in a row, is almost always indicative of an attack or a way too curious employee. Either way, somebody maybe you should have a conversation with. And so, like Things Canary has a really great, freely available sensitive commands token, and you can find it at canarytokens.org. And it basically, you install it into the registry of your systems and of your different systems on your network, and you basically get an alert whenever somebody runs these commands. Nice and easy, a great way to get a quick alert when you see something particularly, that's particularly indicative of an attack. And you don't have to install anything else. You just run that within your, within the Windows registry. So you're not adding another endpoint. You're not adding another set of logs or anything like that. A lot of ransomware commands ransomware groups do not like the command lines. As an old school hacker, this is where I get to be like, the Gen Z today, they're a bunch of losers. They don't know how to use the command line. But that can be really good for you. They do use a lot of different remote tools to move from machine to machine. So we see a lot of Screen Connect, AnyDesk, Splashtop, Type DNC. Any of these remote desktop GUIs are really popular with the ransomware actors. And because these aren't malicious tools, it's not like they try and hide. They're not running in memory. They're not doing anything really odd that you wouldn't be able to detect them. So if you have an EDR on your network, or an XDR or some DR on your network, you can load these hashes in, and anytime that one of these tools are used, especially if they are not authorized for use in your network, anytime one of these are used, you can get an alert and you can go and investigate. So again, that's a nice, quick, easy win, and almost always a sign that there's something malicious going on. Even if it's not ransomware actor, it may be somebody else. Similarly, ransomware actors love Mega.io. That's how they upload a whole lot of data, because you can get a lot of file transfer power and a lot of fast transfer power really cheap. So blocking any of the domains associated with Mega.io, so Mega.nz and so on, is really nice, unless you've got a legitimate business use for it. But then also use the tools that the ransomware actors like to use to transfer files. So rclone, 7-zip, Megasync, other file transfer tools. Again, if they are not tools that are approved for use in the network, absolutely monitor for those file hashes and alert on them, because again, that's probably a sign that there is a ransomware actor active in your network. So really, two really easy ways between looking at the screen GUI, the command and control GUIs, and looking at these file transfers. to detect ransomware activity early in the cycle. Active Directory. Y'all may not know this, but Active Directory turned 21 last year. Which is kind of ironic since it's now old enough to drink after making so many administrators drink over the years. When's the last time you did a security checkup of your Active Directory? Microsoft has some really good documentation on their website, best practices for securing Active Directory. There are a number of other guides out there. But so many people think of Active Directory as kind of set it and forget it. Okay, it's up and running, everything's working, and they don't think about having to do security audits on them, regular security checks, configuration checks, etc. Ransomware actors love your Active Directory. They need your Active Directory. It not only allows them to get the administrative privileges that they need, but it also allows them to push out the ransomware to all of the Windows machines relatively quickly. So you need to give your Active Directory special attention when it comes to security. You need to be thinking about ways to improve it. And a lot of people don't want to touch their Active Directory. Like, we know Active Directory is notoriously fickle, and if you configure something wrong, you might wind up being down for 3 days as you're trying to get it back up and running and so on, and that sucks. But there has to be a way to do it. You have to follow updated and better guidelines for, as Microsoft continues to improve the security of Active Directory, how can you go about improving your Active Directory security in the network? I know there are some specialty products that focus only on Active Directory, and that is certainly an option. But if you can do native security, that's always better. I find the more tools you have, and I know I'm a security vendor saying this, so it's kind of like, I'm going to get slapped by all the other security vendors. But I do find that having more security tools sometimes creates more confusion and actually makes it harder to keep your network secure. So anything you can do to natively secure things, I always find that to be more effective than using, kind of third-party tools to do that, because then you have another console, another set of logs, another whatever else that you have to look at. Don't just audit the settings of your Active Directory. Also make sure you're keeping track of your users. Ransomware groups love to create multiple administrator accounts because if they lose access, they can then go back in and easily regain access. And we've seen this multiple times. Don't just where a ransomware actor will create like 4 admin accounts, and then they will only use 2 of them because they want to keep the other 2 in reserve just in case they're discovered. But also don't just monitor for domain admin accounts, monitor for creation of new local administrator accounts. Here's a great example over on the right of how this was used in the network. And what kind of administrator accounts they created. So, you can see they use names like domain admin, support 1, support 2, etc. So they're creating administrative accounts that are supposed to look normal, but obviously aren't. So that's just something that you want to keep in mind, that these admin accounts are really important to the ransomware groups, and you should be monitoring for new admin accounts. And then also looking for tools that in the network that are meant to exploit your Active Directory. So AdFind is one that we see in used in so many ransomware attacks. We know that at least 6 different ransomware groups use it, and probably a lot more. It's basically a command line Active Directory query tool that you can use to get a feel for all the different accounts that are on the Active Directory server, understand what the admin accounts are, etc. Again, it is not meant to be a deceptive tool, so it generally doesn't run in memory. It's just running on the desktop, so looking for the file hash, can be really good. Looking for, kind of what it's trying to do. So remote system discovery, group policies discovery, and domain trust discovery can be relatively easy in terms of finding out what it's trying to do. It's not hard to find and detect at Find, but you, again, have to know about it. You have to know to be looking for it. And then a couple of other quick things that that we kind of want to talk about here before we go to questions. Unlike a lot of other attacks, a ransomware attack is really complex. You have the initial access broker who generally gets the access. They maintain that access while they're either selling it to a ransomware group in underground forums or whatever, or if they work directly for one of the ransomware groups while they're transferring it over. And then you have the ransomware actor himself who will get into the network. They have to, they have to map and understand the network. They have to get the administrative access that they need. They have to find out where the sensitive files are, steal those sensitive files. Then they have to detect and deploy the ransomware. This takes a while. It doesn't take months, but it generally takes a few days, sometimes a week, which means that you have time. So that complexity of a ransomware attack can actually work in your favor in terms of being able to, there's a lot of activity going on, a lot of things to detect on. So that's really where you need to think about this. It's kind of like a boxing match where you don't necessarily have to get a knockout in the first or second round. You just ultimately need to get that technical win. You need to stop them at some point before they steal your files or before they encrypt the data in your network. So think of it that way. Each of these stages of a ransomware attack is really a round, like in boxing, and you get the chance to, you get multiple chances to take that win to either knock out the ransomware actor or at least get the technical win by, shutting them out of your network. And so we talked, and we've talked forever in security about defense in depth, and this is really an example of a ransomware attack. Really is an example of where defense in depth becomes really important, because there are multiple layers and multiple ways to go after an attack. So that's it kind of for me. Gladys, I will turn it over to you. I'm sure people are sick of hearing my voice, so I'm sure they'd love to hear from you and any questions that you have coming in.
Yeah, we do have a good handful of questions from the audience, but selfishly, I like to sneak in my own before we get to them. Alan, I am legally and morally and contractually obligated to ask you about ChatGPT and to throw that into the conversation here. Besides ChatGPT, other LLM-based AI solutions. How should we expect these technologies to affect the look of ransomware, their viability this year? Or have you actually seen any of these in the wild already?
Yeah, so we do know that ransomware groups are very interested in, and in general, cyber criminals are very interested in ChatGPT, just like everybody else. So we've seen multiple instances where groups are trying to use ChatGPT to make better code or build better phishing emails, etc. So far, not very successfully. But as we've seen with everything else with ChatGPT, it learns and gets better over time. And right now, there are a lot of guardrails in ChatGPT that kind of keep it from doing bad things. But like with anything else, one of the things that the criminals are doing right now is trying to figure out how to bypass those guardrails. So there was a great example of if you just ask ChatGPT to write you an info stealer, it won't do it. It'll tell you, I'm not allowed to write that. I can't do malware. But if you came at the question with a different angle of, oh, hey, my boss wants to get a theoretical understanding of how info stealers work, what's the sample code that I could send to him? And then ChatGPT gave him the answer. So kind of, part of what we're seeing right now from the different underground forums and the cyber criminal forums is, hey, how can we poke at the sides of those guardrails and figure out how to give it better data? The code that I've seen, the malware code that I have seen ChatGPT produce is not great, but that's fine because most malware code isn't all that great either. They're not trying to write great code. They're trying to steal things. But the thing is, it will get better as it continues to learn, and that is always what the concern is as it gets better and as the criminals get better at manipulating it, are we going to see better code, better phishing emails, better things like that developed using AI technology?
Right. If we get to chat about this again in the second half of this year, I'm going to bookmark this moment and ask you to follow up just to see how much the landscape has changed between now and then. Okay, great. We have, as I said, a bunch of audience questions. I'm going to start with one from Kusra. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Who asks, what is the solution you suggest to secure ESXi? Is it possible to two-factor authenticate ESXi login?
Yeah, so there are two components to this. One, don't expose ESXi servers to the internet that don't need to be exposed, right? So if it doesn't have to touch the internet, don't have it touch the internet, because that's just going to make it even more vulnerable. Once you're inside the network, the two things that you want is you want to make sure that your ESXi systems are fully patched. So that should be kind of, I know we all have a lot of patches we always have to apply, but likely your ESXi servers are supporting kind of really your important data, so they should be prioritized with patching. But absolutely, there are multiple solutions of kind of multi-factor authentication for ESXi. There's some great like Okta tie-ins and other types of things. And then having really strong backups of your ESXi servers is also important because they're VMs, right? If they get encrypted and you can just wipe that server and restart and start up with your new VMs, then it doesn't matter if anybody ransomware them because you have the backup copy right there that you can restore immediately. So kind of take the multi-pronged approach to your to securing your ESXi infrastructure.
Great. A question here from Lynn. How to balance security and usability? Some security measures, such as restricting access to certain systems or applications, can impact usability and productivity. It's essential to balance security with the needs of the organization and its employees. Alan, can you comment on this one? Not much of a question, but an observation, I think, a keen one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this is one of the things that, we talk about all the time. I would tell people, and I know I'm right on this, you don't need the local administrator accounts. Get rid of all local administrator accounts in your network because they just create more problems. You need domain admin accounts, but if every workstation or laptop has its own local administrator account, then you're just asking for trouble. And the pushback I get all the time is, if I do that, then the users will, the employees will revolt because they're used to having full control over their systems. I'm like, right, but you've got to balance that, and I totally get that. But I think if you frame things in a way that shows why it's important to remove something, so okay, no, you can't have local administrator access to your machine anymore, but that's fine. You can still install software. Still allow them to do the things they need to do their job. It just sometimes means more work for you. I think oftentimes the reason we have a policy in place is it's just easier to put the policy in place than it is to do the extra work to put in a policy that is both more secure and still allows employees to do their job. And that's really where we need to kind of focus on that. And that's just one example. You always have to do that. You always have to understand the impact of new policies on employees and their jobs. So you can't just implement policies in a bubble you have to work with the different departments and groups in order to do that properly. At my company, we went through and we improved DNS security for our domain name and for emails that are coming in and so on. And one of the things that we found is a lot of the tools that our sales teams were using didn't meet those standards. So we took longer to implement those DNS security tools so that we could get the sales team to either pressure those vendors to improve the security of their product or move to a different product that did meet those standards. So that's the way that we were able to say, okay, we're going to have a more secure network with fewer spam emails and phishing emails coming in, but we're also not going to disrupt your workflow. And those are kind of the things that we look at when we're figuring out how to do better serve the employees, both by being more secure and allowing to do their job.
Right. Alan, something you just said kind of makes me wonder, how much of ransomware prevention and mitigation do you think is actually end user training based and education versus, tools based, infrastructure based?
I always try to kind of, we have this tendency in security to blame our fellow employees when something goes wrong. Why did you click that link? You should have known that no Nigerian prince wants to give you $1 million or whatever. Instead of asking ourselves, well, why did we let that mail get to the employee in the first place? That's a very obvious phishing email. We should have stopped that. So there is a matter of education. There's always, you can't live in a bubble in security. You have to let people know. That's why I loved ransomware tabletop exercises, because you get to bring all the departments in together and really educate them on how a ransomware attack works and why we have to do things a certain way in order to be more effective at stopping ransomware attacks, but also understand that, day to day, most people's top priority isn't security. And so we have to do everything we can to make sure that the bad thing doesn't get to them in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. Here we have a question from Darren. You kind of alluded to this earlier in your presentation, but Darren asks, several states have passed laws that ban ransom payments. Does that slow down ransomware groups at all?
Sadly, it doesn't. So we've seen like North Carolina, Texas, Pennsylvania, and I think Florida and New York also have laws preventing ransom payments. And it really doesn't. I mean, ransomware actors are already breaking the law. They don't care about breaking state laws. And in fact, some of these laws, I think, are a little bit misguided because they don't actually solve the problem. Going way back here, in 1979, in the 70s and 80s, Italy had a spate of kidnappings, and so they banned ransom payments as an attempt to stop the kidnappings. And the year after they put that ban in place, the number of kidnappings actually went up because the kidnappers could then double extort. They could get the money to get your loved one back and then get extra money from you, blackmail you, because you then broke the law by paying the ransom. So it doesn't really solve the problem. What solves the problem is better funding for security.
Right. I'm going to squeeze in one more question here from Michael, who asks, we are a small team. Where can we go to keep up with ways to improve our defenses?
So this is one of the only times in the world that I'll recommend Twitter for anything, but there's a lot of really good information being shared on Twitter by vendors, by researchers. Just looking at the ransomware hashtag, there's a lot of fantastic data that's there. There are a ton of vendor blogs. There are a ton of, sort of independent researchers that share a lot of really, really good data that you can hopefully use and make actionable. And so that's one place where you can go and see all of that happen. Another place I really love is the DFIR reports, DFIR reports. It's a website, and they have got a bunch of honeypots around the world, And when a ransomware attacker comes in, they basically catalog everything they do. So you can see all the tools they use, how long it takes them to get the data out, where they're sending the data, and how they deploy the ransomware. And so having all of that really mapped out for anybody to see is a great resource, so you can kind of take a look at the latest tools that the ransomware actors are using and how they use them in networks.
Yeah, great. Well, I think that's all the time we have for questions, but thank you so much for those answers, Alan, and for the great presentation. Everyone stay tuned. We're going to take a very quick break, and we'll be back at the top of the hour for our second session of the day called Real-World Best Practices for Ransomware Defense and Remediation. In the meantime, take a chance to check out those resources that are on your console provided by Rubrik, and we'll be right back.
Thank you all.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome back to our Real-World Ransomware Defense and Remediation Virtual Summit. My name is Leif Lowe, and I'll be your moderator for the second session today. And this session is entitled Real-World Best Practices for Ransomware Defense and Remediation. And this entire event is being sponsored by Rubrik. Well, ransomware certainly continues to present a persistent threat to enterprises and organizations of all sizes. Ransomware attacks have actually been on the rise since 2020, both in terms of scope and sheer volume. Actually, according to Verizon's 2022 data breach report, there's been a 13% increase in ransomware attacks over the last 5 years. In fact, the first half of 2022 saw more than 236 million individual ransomware attacks across the globe. And just this year, and it's not just the amount of them, but the amount of each attack. Just this year alone, the average cost of a ransomware attack has been nearly $1.85 million. National Health Service recently experienced a $100 million loss after being hit with the WannaCry ransomware attack. So you don't want your company to be in the headlines for having a ransomware attack. But thankfully, about 90% of ransomware attacks don't result in any loss, any financial loss. And during this session, we'll be discussing some concrete real-world tactics for presenting your best defense against ransomware, as well as how to remediate attack when one does occur. Well, our featured speaker today is John O'Neill, Sr. John's professional IT career began as a teenager, back as a teenager. It's taken him on many wonderful adventures over the past 30 years. John's IT path started out with programming, but quickly branched out, and has included opportunities everywhere from the help desk to the corner office that has shaped his IT journey. John specializes in cybersecurity, cloud, and infrastructure technologies, and his broad skill set includes business systems like ERP and CRM, desktop and server operating systems, identity management, endpoint management, public, private, and hybrid cloud, and he and I have certainly presented many sessions on that, networking services, network architecture, IP telephony, cyber insurance, and cybersecurity. John is passionate about giving back to the IT community and develops relevant, timely content for IT pros. As part of the MVP Days team, he develops both online and in-print content. He's also authored material as a contributing editor for the petri.co.il online community, as well as being a senior contributor to Tom's IT Pro, Redmond Magazine, Netrix, and both Thomson Reuters, Aspetor Books, and Executive Blueprints. John, it is great to have you back.
It's great to be here, Leif. I missed you, bud, and I'm glad we're here to have this great session today.
It has been a while, indeed. All right, now before we launch into the second session here, just want to remind you of a couple of housekeeping items. If you would like to submit a question at any time, which we certainly encourage you to do, you can post a question using the question field to the left of the slide window. Type your question in there and hit submit, and we will get to as many of those as we can, but at the end of the session. I also want to remind you that this entire summit is being recorded, so you'll be able to review it again or pass it along to share with a colleague. All right, John, let us dive in here and begin our exploration of how to best defend against ransomware attacks, and just as importantly, how to mitigate and recover from attack when it does happen. All right, starting off with a kind of a broad brushstroke here. Generally speaking, what would you say are some of the best practices organizations should absolutely have in place when defending themselves against ransomware?
Well, this one here, Leif, I have to go with creating the culture of cybersecurity. And it's what I mean by that is that it is exponentially more difficult to defend your IT systems, your infrastructure, everything that makes up your IT organization, if the members of your organization, your company, your nonprofit, whatever it may be, don't take a security-first culture approach, right? Because you're constantly fighting internal and external. And
that makes sense.
This has become far worse, I've seen over the last few years, as we have a generational shift. And it's kind of interesting because if you'd had asked me 15 years ago, I'd have said, well, the problem is now that there's a lot of folks in an organization that are, approaching retirement, and they spent most of their career without computer systems, without IT, so they're kind of hardliners. They don't see its importance and that sort of thing. And so when they move on and attrition happens and younger generations get in here, it'll be easier. And actually, the reverse has happened. My theory on why it's happened is because, younger folks, or, well, I guess I'm not so young anymore, but folks like us that have, had IT as part of our career from when we started until now, we're comfortable with it. We understand it and that sort of thing. So we tend to do a lot more on our own. We tend to dismiss things. We tend to implement shadow IT. Yeah. And shadow IT creates more glaring security risks than almost anything else I see, right? And the answer is always the same, that, hey, I didn't realize it would create a security risk. And my response is always, yes, that's why you're supposed to call and talk to us before you do this thing.
Yep. Can't stubbornly do it on your own.
Right. And because, they do it thinking, well, IT's just being a pain and they won't let me do this and they won't let me do that. And this is the easiest way for me to do this thing, and I'm just going to do it. And then they do it, and an infection comes in or ransomware comes in, something along those lines, and now they just want IT to make it all better, and you can't unring a bell.
Yep. That's for sure.
Yeah. So as a best, go ahead.
Absolutely, what you're saying about making sure it's part of the culture. It's not something you can just bolt on as an afterthought. It has to be truly part of the fabric.
Yeah, and so on that, building a culture, I get that a lot. Well, how do you change the culture of your company or your organization or that sort of thing? And I tell people, first off, be prepared for a marathon, not a sprint. This is going to take concerted effort over time. And what it involves is you need to educate, and we're going to cover that numerous times today. But in this, I'm talking about educating members of your organization, particularly, you want to get that buy-in, that support from the C-suite, the executive level, and down of security. Cybersecurity is important to the ongoing success of our company, of our organization, right? If we don't approach it with its importance being recognized, then we're sure to fail. And once you convince them of that, which will take some effort and providing data and showing them things like, well, if I took this IT system away, these are all the people that would not be able to do their job. These are the customers we wouldn't be able to serve, right? And you start giving them that data and that analysis. And now all of a sudden they're thinking of it the same way they think of, wow, a fire would really, screw up my operation. So I'm going to put a sprinkler system in. I'm going to put fire extinguishers. I'm going to have inspections. I'm going to do all that kind of stuff. Well, why do they do that? Because they know a fire would really impact their success. So we need to show them that a cyber event would impact their success just as much.
Equally damaging, if not more so. Yeah. Right. Makes sense. Makes sense indeed. All right, what is it about ransomware that makes it so pernicious and dangerous? It seems to kind of present a unique level of threat.
Absolutely. And, I always tell people when we talk about ransomware or cyber attacks more generally, they used to be broken up into two categories. It was either somebody was doing it to gain money, right? Mm-hmm. So it's all about the theft.
Yep.
And the theft for monetary gain. And then the second reason was all about theft of proprietary information or competitive information, right? It was sort of still a theft, but so that they could get the work you've been doing on a patent pending product or something that gives them a competitive advantage, or they could do that and then turn it into the first one where they basically extort you for money to get that information back, right? And so those were the two areas. And then in 2022, of course, cyber warfare hit the scene with a vengeance, and that's actually the toughest one right now, because cyber warfare, the attacker really doesn't care what they get. Their goal is to simply disrupt and destroy. And do it as much as they can. And so you have those three things, and ransomware fits into all those three silos. If an attacker can use ransomware and get it in your system and lock you up, so now you cannot conduct business, you cannot do normal operations, you may not be able to comply with laws indicating the information you have to protect. Say you're a healthcare industry or something like that, an attacker ransoms your data, you now have a real problem, because if they release that data, that's a problem for many reasons, not the least of which is you're in a massive HIPAA, high-tech, all sorts of regulatory problems.
Right.
So, ransomware can be used for that, to get money. They can be used for that to steal. If I get into your system as an attacker and I encrypt all your confidential engineering drawings for that next generation product you have, and you don't have it, and I can give it to another company, right? I just changed the dynamic of your marketplace in the coming years. Yeah. And then the third one, if I can get in and ransom, encrypt all your systems and basically shut you down, I certainly have damaged and disrupted and destroyed, right? So ransomware can actually be used as a tool for any of those three primary reasons that we see cyber attacks. Yep. And that makes it especially pernicious, because, other things that only fit into one silo don't spread as much, they aren't seen as much, and that sort of thing. So I feel that's one of the reasons that ransomware is kind of stands alone. The other thing is that ransomware has a unique public perception. And, when it becomes public knowledge,
that's for sure.
Right? And if your organization makes the headlines as a victim of ransomware, your existing customer base, your potential customer base, all of them may have very mixed emotions about continuing to do business with you.
Yep.
And it really doesn't matter what you say after they become aware of that, right? I mean, we all think it does. Like, we can explain it away. We can tell them, it was because of this, and we can tell them all the great things we've done to prevent it in the future. But again, it's that can't unring a bell thing. Yeah. In the back of their minds, many times they're thinking to themselves, well, if they got ransomed once, they could probably get ransomed again. And I'm not saying it's guaranteed to cause you to lose business, but it's certainly not a good look, and it can result in an operational loss. Yeah. And so that's another thing that makes it uniquely dangerous, I think.
Yep. Yeah. Once customers or potential customers get scared away, it's awful hard to win them back, as it were.
Exactly, right? And then And think about it. Even if it's not enough to push a customer away from you, maybe it's enough that they go out and they look in the marketplace just to see if there are other alternatives. You just created an opening for your competitors to win a bid, right? To get the chance at an elevator pitch and that sort of thing. Because let's face it, the best case scenario for organizations when they have a customer is that they're doing such a bang up job that customer doesn't even listen to other opportunities. They are so happy with what they've got. That's the standard that we strive for. I don't know that it's always obtained, but as long as we're striving for that and we have a good relationship with our customer, we really don't want to give them cause to pause, if you will.
Yep, makes sense. Yeah, it is crazy. It's like it's been weaponized on a variety of levels, like as you've mentioned. All right. Well, there was I did hear at the end there was a question about this after the first session. We'll get more into this. How much of this defense is really based on technology, the technology systems you put into place, and how much is staff training, to have them, help them be more competent at recognizing a potential attack or phishing email or something like that?
Well, so this is
part of the culture.
This is a great slide right here, right?
Yeah.
Because this is, let's just face it, being long-term IT guys like we are, we know that, IT pros, sometimes we get lost or caught up in the fact that technology solves all problems, right? We just got to deploy the tech and that sort of thing. And I'm here to tell you that you're chasing a moving finish line. And here's why I say that. I don't know any organization that can deploy all of their resources to combating cyber attacks. Because, then they would effectively go out of business, right? Or they would have no purpose in being in business. Whereas the attackers, on the other hand, that is their business. So, yes, 100% of their resources are deployed at attacking you.
Right.
So every technology you deploy, they're already working to overcome, right? And we're chasing, a carrot or that's being pulled in front of us that we're never going to get. And it's just a matter of time before they overcome the technology before you deploy the next technology, and they're in. They have you. And once they have you, it's all over but the crying. Yeah. So I go back to that first statement, that best practice of changing the culture. Part of changing the culture, a big part of changing the culture, is education. And remember I said we talk about this a number of times, and during that part I talked about educating the organization about the impact to successful operations if we're hit. Well, you also need to, as part of your culture shift or security first culture, you need to train people to be aware of the fact that, there are bad people doing bad things.
Yeah.
And we wish that wasn't true, but it is. Yep. And so pretending it's not true simply puts us all at risk.
Yep.
And, I get it that sometimes, it might feel good to put your hands over your ears and close your eyes and go, no, right? But unfortunately, that doesn't actually change the outcome. So I feel it's better to turn around and face it head on and educate everybody into what they're doing. And this is also becoming a much stronger requirement of insurance underwriters when it comes to your cyber insurance, because these underwriters are learning, and cyber insurance is one of the areas where I specialize in. And so 5 years ago, an average cyber insurance, and it wasn't even a separate policy then, or a rider on your policy, would have been a page, if that, maybe half a page. And now, 2022, many insurance policies were 70 plus pages, some of them over 100 now. And what that is because of, right? And everybody goes, well, that's because the threats are greater, and that's absolutely true. But the main reason the insurance company has written all that isn't just because the threats have increased. It's because their understanding of the threats that are causing them to have to pay out is increasing.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so now what they've done is they've had time to analyze things, and they're realizing that organizations that have a better trained user base are lower risk even without additional technology.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, and so they've done a lot of things. A lot of them provide resources, right, such as phishing simulations and analysis and all these things. They provide them as part of your policy, free of charge. You're going to get that help and get those resources. And on top of that, in 2023, what I'm seeing, talking with a lot of the underwriters, is that they're now going to require organizations who want a policy renewal or a policy quote to prove how much training they do, how they do it, what they're training on, right? Impact of that training and that sort of thing. So now it's not just about the technical protection of your resources by teaching your user not to click a link or something like that. It's about being able to get that insurance that protects you also, right? Insurance is another form of protection. We have technology, we have education, we have insurance. There's these layers that we form to protect ourselves, and that's one of them. So if you're not on your A game as far as educating users, now's the time to step up your training, right?
Yeah.
Play the Rocky music in the background and get your training going.
Yep, absolutely. Get everyone on board. That's for sure. All right. And part of that training was to recognize, where it comes from and what it is. Are you seeing any kind of new and emerging threat vectors for ransomware coming into the company? Is it still primarily emails, or what are some of the ways it's getting in there?
Fortunately, I'm not sure which way this would go, but still, like 80% of your initial vectors are through some sort of user failure, right? So clicking on a phishing email link or responding to it, that sort of thing. And so that has been fairly consistent year over year. And that's why I said I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but some people would say, hey, it's a good thing because it's not changing. It means we can, continue to refine our focus. And I'm like, yeah, but it also means that we haven't been effective yet at getting our users not to do those things, right?
Yeah.
When that number shifts, it will be because we have finally cracked the code of how to convince our user base not to click the link, not to do these things, right? And it's super important. And so and this is a little more on the education thing, but what I tell people, the analogy I use with this is those that have kids will understand this one. Of course, I have five, so I get this. You might put a fence up around your yard because you live on a busy street and you want to protect your kids. But because you have a fence there, you're not going to ignore teaching your kids don't run out in the road, right? You're still teaching them don't run out in the road, don't run out in the road. You're reinforcing that, you're doing that. And the analogy there is just because I put in spam filters and phishing filters and all those kind of things, that's my fence line.
Yeah.
I don't look at it and go, oh, well, I'm so safe now I don't have to train my users not to click something.
Yeah, it's not the only line of defense. Yeah.
Absolutely. I tell everybody, build that fence. I'm not telling you not to have that fence. In fact, I want you to build that fence, make it strong, and then build another fence beyond it, right? Yeah. Kind of like a prison does, multi-layers, but I still want you to train your users so even if those fences fell down, they wouldn't run out in the road and get hit by the ice cream truck. so that's super important when it comes to phishing and education. But now into that other vector of the other 20%, and we're talking about emerging and new threat vectors. Of course, we do see new techniques all the time because the attackers they're leveraging what's working, the phishing, obviously, the 80%, but they're also still trying to find ways to infect, to penetrate, to compromise other areas where people aren't clicking links or doing that kind of thing. So we're seeing a resurgence in old school techniques. In the last year, there's been a significant spike in USB-borne threats.
Oh, jeez.
Right. So flash drives getting plugged in or that sort of thing, right? Yeah. And you and I remember, back in the early days of us worrying about virus infections and things like that. It was all about the floppy drives were infected or that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Don't put that in your computer without scanning it, that sort of thing. Well, we kind of got away from that, and the attackers noticed we got away from it, and so they started, pushing again at, well, let's infect these USB flash drives, and then when people plug them in, they essentially have walked us right by all those fences that we put up, right into the heart of our organization, and bam, we're in. Another one is juice jacking.
I've seen a lot of stories about that in the news lately.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's getting a lot of press right now because the FBI, I believe it was the Denver field office, just sent out a tweet about it, right? And in the last session, he was talking about how Twitter is a great place to kind of keep up on things.
Keep aware of all that. Yeah.
Right, and so that the FBI tweeted out, "Hey, be aware of this. Don't plug into public outlets or use, cables that you find laying around, that sort of thing." And it blew up, and the stories come out. Well, the FCC has had a page dedicated to juice jacking for like 2 years.
Oh, really?
So it's been out there a while, and in fact, we did during an in-person conference that I was presenting at last year, we actually took a USB charging cable, right? It just looks like the normal lightning cable that you would buy, and tore it apart and showed how it actually had circuitry and software embedded so that when plugged in, not only would it infect your device, but it began broadcasting a Wi-Fi network that the attacker could connect to, and get it. And what we found some examples of is that attackers would buy these things and they would just drop them randomly in public places.
Yeah, right. Knowing someone would pick them up. Oh, that's crazy.
You got it. In the grocery store parking lot, or in an airport, or even churches and things like that. And particularly in areas where, like, somebody would pick it up, but then maybe sit for a while. So think an airport or a train station where, you're waiting for your flight or your train or whatever, and you pick it up and you're like, oh, wow, well, here, I got a chance. I can charge my phone a little bit while I'm waiting. Yeah. And they're sitting over there within range of that Wi-Fi signal, and they can connect. And literally during the layover of your travel day, you've just lost passwords and contacts and text messages and photos and all sorts of things. So it's a pretty nasty way to lose stuff.
Yeah.
And on that particular one, it's interesting because I just addressed this for someone yesterday, and they said, "Hey, this news station, said, hey, you can go out on Amazon and buy this $10 red blocker, and it takes care of it." And I said, no, please don't do that. I said, first off, you need to understand that this isn't Yes, Virginia, where if you see it in the sun, it must be true.
Yeah, right.
And a lot of folks may not get that reference. It's the old Christmas story, and Virginia's, wondering is Santa Claus real or not, and talks to her father, and the father says, well, what did the Sun newspaper say? And she said, well, it says that Santa's there. And he said, well, if you see it in the sun, it must be true. We kind of have that still, where if we watch the news and the news says, hey, go buy one of these and it'll protect you, we go, oh, okay, it'll protect us. What we don't realize is they had some intern do a Google search, right? They didn't have a security expert analyze this thing, tear it apart, reverse engineer, make sure it's good, whatever. They did a Google search. And in fact, the one that I was asked about in particular, I just took them right on the site, and you know, it's from a very obtuse named company, right? It's coming from China and all these different things, and I'm like, I would stay away from that with all haste. And you know, if you want to charge using your reputable manufacturer brand charger and cable plugged directly into an outlet, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Yep. Carry your own charger. Don't pick one up off the street.
And so that's kind of a newer threat vector that a lot of people don't think of is, things like that. And the vector is really the attacker seeing how new technology is being deployed in our society and then figuring out how to leverage that for their gain and your loss.
Yep. Taking advantage of it. And because, like what we were saying about layovers, you're sitting in the airport for a couple hours, you're bound to going to need to charge your phone or charge your device. So, that's pretty nasty.
Yep. And I've seen many people where they have a charger and a cable with them, but they see one there and they're like, well, I don't have to dig mine out of the bag or whatever. I'll just plug into this one.
Yeah. Or they, hey, free charger. It's a backup,
And public service announcement, because again, I have 5 kids. I think this is so important. All you parents out there, take a moment and really reinforce this with your kids, because they are what I see as the worst about just plugging into whatever's available.
Or they're losing their own charger,
they're constantly
thinking they found one for free.
Exactly. They're constantly burning their batteries down, right? Because it's TikTok nonstop from the moment their eyes open till they close. And they'll just plug into anything without a second thought. And attackers have no qualms about weaponizing your child's personal information against them and you and their friends and everyone they can. They will weaponize it, and they will hurt it. I mean, we saw this a couple years ago during the great Finland ransomware event, where the largest social services agency in Finland was compromised, and the attackers threatened to publish the patient's information, and they actually, like was Alan mentioned earlier, double extorted. So they were extorting the agency, but then they were also trying to extort each individual patient, right? And so I'm a patient, and they're trying to get money for me to not release my records and that sort of thing. And what they did is they meant to expose a few records of people that didn't pay to prove that they were serious. And they ended up releasing all the records of all the people, whatever. Yeah. And so think about it. And don't even think about it from your own perspective. Think about that 14-year-old person that's struggling, that's seeing a therapist, and now all that therapist's notes have been published out on the internet for all that 14-year-old's friends to read and see. That's pretty devastating stuff.
It's made that bad situation way worse. Yeah. God.
Right. And so I know I got off on a tangent there, but I do consider that one super important. Educate your kids. Just don't plug into any cable that's out there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so it's not just new threat vectors; it's new threat impacts that are happening for sure.
Exactly, and for our listeners that are on here, it won't take you long to imagine how that same attack vector could hurt your company, right? You probably have loads of users that have company phones and company tablets. And if they were to plug into something and then walk back into your network, and that phone connects to your Wi-Fi network internally, again, they walked it by your perimeter defenses. They came right through that fence line and got inside the organization. And, it's something to be aware of and take definitive action again. And the definitive action is mainly education.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, shifting from defense to remediation, when an attack does happen, in the unfortunate instance of a ransomware attack being successful, what's the first thing a company should do? What's their first response?
Mm-hmm. So
panic.
Let's hope not, right?
Yeah.
A prepared mind tends not to panic, so we're going to all be prepared. But the first thing we do here is what I call drop the hammer. And the way I describe this is, odds are most of us has watched some TV show or movie or whatever where we see, it's a boat or it's a submarine and they've sprung a leak. What happens? All these watertight doors drop.
Yep.
They seal off everything from all the different areas, right? Or it's an attack and it's a military base or whatever, right? And they seal the doors on the building. I remember the old Stargate series on TV, right? They were at Cheyenne Mountain and they'd close the mountain. That was it. And what this is in terms of a cyber response, it means collapse your VPNs, right?
Yep.
Disconnect your DIA. Have these things so that you start separating and isolating your networks, right? If you have a 16 location network and it's all meshed together, and you detect an anomaly or an attack inside one of those locations, the faster you drop those watertight doors, the faster you disconnect those VPN connections and break that mesh, the less of those 16 entities will actually be infected.
Right. Make it as hard as possible for that infection to get around.
Absolutely. And so speaking about like literal things folks can do here, automate being able to push a red button or, click a button in your piece of software, that sort of thing, that causes all those VPN tunnels to drop. Disables the direct internet connection, so there is no connection to command and control networks behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And everybody goes, wow, well, how do you do that, John? Is this a script? Is this whatever? And I'm like, it could be, but you don't have to get that complicated to still be able to do a lot of this and have a great impact. Do you have a firewall config that builds up all those VPN tunnels and that is used to connect that internet connection, to your network? That's usually where it comes in, is at that firewall. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, so make a version of that config that has none of that stuff enabled.
Yeah.
And then when an attack occurs, all you literally have to do is open and save to firewall.
Yep.
And as soon as that new configuration is saved to that perimeter device, those tunnels drop, that internet dies, all that stuff happens, right? And it only took you moments to get it done. Probably less than a minute.
You got to make it as easy as possible.
Absolutely. Another real world tip here, note from the field, is as part of when you get your organization to take that security first cultural approach, then you implement things and educate your users that, hey, we're going to have a lot of sophisticated systems and technology that are monitoring, that are helping us detect, that are helping us respond. And our first response is going to be dropping them or dropping those doors, or, maybe a better way to describe it to them is securing our detected system, the system we detected something on, then analyzing, right? And people go, well, how's that different than what we're doing? And I'm like, well, what a lot of places are doing is they detect that Leif has just tried to log in from Russia. And Leif doesn't live in Russia, and he's not traveling to Russia on work, right? And so the system flags that, and the IT team, the security team, gets this alert. Now, in a lot of organizations, they'll spend the time to, well, let's try and call Leif, and they leave a message on your cell phone, right? And they're waiting to hear back from you, and they haven't done anything as far as locking out the account or that sort of thing. So that entire time while they're trying to investigate because they don't want to interrupt your work by accident if it's a false alert, well, if it's a real alert, you're leaving every moment you're leaving that account enabled, it can be compromised, it can be expanded, it can be whatever. So you need to take that approach of, as soon as that comes up, I'm going to lock Leif's account down, right? I'm going to disable the account, reset the password, and then I'm going to call Leif.
Yeah.
And I'm going to leave him a cell phone message that says, hey, give me a ring back when you have a chance. We detected something odd with your user account, and we wanted to follow up with you, right? And now you're either going to call because you got that voicemail, or you're going to call because you can't get into the system.
You have to get back in.
Either way, we're going to get a hold of you, and we're going to get you in. And just had this the other day, just last week, my team locked out both the CEO and the CFO for those kind of alerts. And both the CEO and the CFO were thankful because that's that security first culture, right? And everybody's like, they weren't thankful that their account got locked out. No, but they were thankful that they had an IT team that had implemented systems that detected the anomaly fast, that they had an IT team that reacted quick enough to lock it down and keep it safe and contact them and work them through the process. Yep. Both of those folks understood that the few minutes that they were disrupted was way better than the entire company being infected and shut down and thousands of people standing around unable to do their job, right?
Well worth the inconvenience, yeah.
Absolutely, and
sure.
The difference there is that security first culture. It's from the top down.
Yep, makes perfect sense. Indeed. All right. Again, in the aftermath of an attack, once an organization has identified it and locked things down and doing what they can, how can they make sure that they have fully recovered and they've fully eradicated the threat?
This is a tough one, and the answer to this one is unfortunately more general than specific. And the answer is diligence over time. Right, and so you believe you've eradicated. You believe you've eradicated it. Your IPS and endpoint protection systems and everything else are giving you the all clear, right? Saying the machine is ready for use and there is no signs of infection or attack anymore and that sort of thing. Well, you don't just release it back on the network and walk away and go, oh, we're all good. You release it back on the network and you have a heightened state of awareness over time, right? For the first hours and then the days and even into the weeks that come, you're continually analyzing reports, looking at your dashboards, watching for anything that even sniffs of the stink of a cyber attack, right? Because we have seen this as a threat vector where the ransomware, the malware that's being deployed has very sophisticated evasion techniques built in. And so if it senses that, hey, I see that their system's trying to remove me or whatever, it can go dormant for a period of time. And you don't see anything, right? You don't see activity across the ports in your firewall or whatever, and then all of a sudden after a timer expires, it lights back up and there it is. And so you have to have diligence over time to make sure that you have full eradication. And it's no different than if you had a rat infestation, I guess. You would catch as many rats, and now you're not seeing them as much, but you would still probably be on heightened awareness for a while looking for them.
Yep, absolutely.
And I don't mind using that comparison because these cyber attackers are rats.
Yep, that's a very germane analogy for sure. All right. Well, looking out at the the news of various ransomware attacks and how companies have responded, what are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen companies make, and how can others avoid them, not repeat those mistakes?
One of the biggest mistakes I've seen, I can almost attribute to organizational arrogance, I guess, where they just believe that they've implemented enough technology that they have nothing to worry about, that they're beyond reproach or above the possibility of a successful attack or that sort of thing, and so they let down their guard. They don't. They don't do anything, and that sort of thing, and that is a surefire way to lose the farm.
Yep.
And another one is that organizations don't carve out and understand the specific dollar need for security investments and put that in their budget. There's this is also a tough one, and again, that shift to a security first culture really helps you. Once you have that buy-in at the executive level, this really helps here with investment, because when you don't have that, people look at it and go, well, you know what? The reason we have IT is to help us make more money or serve more customers or, deliver the thing that we're here to deliver. So we need IT to focus on how to better do that, whether it be a new business system or whether it be a new communication systems or, better scheduling and collaboration, whatever it may be. They want you to focus and invest all your money on that and not on security. And, that's tough, where you have to go in and you have to say, well, if we don't invest these dollars in sophisticated endpoint detection and response system, or we don't invest dollars in an MSA with a partner to help us provide security, we're going to lose all those other things that we're also investing money in, like the new business system, like the new collaboration tool or whatever. They're all going to go down and be useless. So what's the point?
Right.
And another one, and this is kind of the combination of both the lack of investment and that organizational arrogance, if you will, is I see a lot of people now just saying, you know what, we'll be fine without cyber insurance, and we're not going to do this, and we're not going to do that. And I certainly want to say that as soon as you're ransomed, right, as soon as that attacker has your system and locks it down and you're stuck, a timer starts clicking. And what that timer is how long you can sustain the loss of access to that data or that system before it's irrecoverable, before it has cost you so much that you're out of business. You're gone. And it's interesting, if you look at the data,
it's probably not that long.
Ransoms for manufacturing organizations are the highest. Ransoms for government agencies are the lowest. Well, that makes perfect sense to what I just said. A manufacturer typically has a very limited time before they've lost so much money they're out of business. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
A government agency, it's the government. It's a pain in the butt, but it's taxpayers' dollars. They'll just
and it can kind of drag on a little bit.
It's not like the government agency is going to close its doors after 2 months because, hey, we've used up all our recovery money and we're not here. No, eventually they're going to open their doors back up and serve customers and that sort of thing. And so attackers in that case are making the ransoms lower so that it's more convenient to pay than it is to pay for a cleanup or that sort of thing, right? If the ransom's $100,000 and you're going to spend $500,000 to clean up, not a huge math problem there.
Nope. Doesn't take too long to think about that. All right, as we start to get ready to wrap up here, I always like to ask you any final thoughts you have, anything you think we might have missed, or anything you want to really hammer in there.
Well, I'm going to forego just because I know we have some good questions, and I want to make sure we get at least one or two of those. So let's hit one of those.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, certainly the security first culture. That's a good one. All right, we got an interesting question here. In the event of an attack, is there any sort of agency or organization that we should report the attack to? Like, do we call the FBI or do we call? Is there someone we should call?
Absolutely, and this varies by your location, right? So some states actually have laws about you have to report certain level of attack or that sort of thing. Others don't. But what I tell people is that, there's little harm in reporting these things. I always tell them to report to the FBI's cybersecurity division, right? I always tell them absolutely they need to report it to their insurance company's cyber response team, that sort of thing. And the challenge here is that a lot of organizations talk themselves out of that because they're afraid if they report it, it becomes public knowledge, and then all those things we talked about earlier about damage to reputation, all that sort of stuff happens.
All out in the open.
Yeah, or they think, hey, I'm not going to report it to the insurance company because it's small enough that my deductible's higher than it, and I don't want to pay it, and I don't want them to know about it because then they'll increase my premiums. And I understand those. I absolutely understand those concerns. But in big picture, the end survival of your organization is more important, and having the resources that those organizations can bring to bear at your disposal on your side give you much better odds at not just beating the attacker back this time, but keeping them away. Because I can tell you from the field, attackers will continue to draw from the same well until they can't get water from it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Keep doing what works.
Absolutely. I have seen a company ransomed and then re-ransomed again 6 months later by the same organization. And it's ridiculous and it's frustrating, but it's, the attackers are gonna make that money any way they can.
All right, we've probably got time to sneak in one more quick question. This is an interesting one. This person, he said, I hear stories of companies actually paying the ransom. Does this really work? Do they really get access to their data and systems back? I mean, I share that person's suspicion. Trusting criminal is probably a bad idea.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where we're all at. And so, unfortunately, or fortunately, hope springs eternal. And we're hoping that they do what they say they're going to do, because we need to get back in. We know that timer is clicking, right? That we're on the clock here, and so we've determined that the only way we're going to beat that buzzer is to pay them off and get access back to the system. And so we pay them. And I have seen this. I have seen organizations pay ransoms, even though the legality of paying a ransom in their area is
questionable.
Tells them they're not allowed to, right? It's illegal to pay a ransom or to do that kind of thing. They still pay it because, they want to stay in business. And we're always worried about the criminal not delivering the decryption key. Here's the reason that I see them coming through more often than not. It's because if they don't deliver the decryption key for you and that becomes public knowledge, who else is going to ever pay them?
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah.
And it's even next level to that, my friend. I've seen cyber criminals, after they've been paid a ransom, send quality surveys to the people that they ransomed.
Oh God, you got to be kidding!
Literally asking them, "Hey, was the process easy? Do you believe that we were courteous and delivered on our promises in a timely fashion?" Right? These things that you and I we want to laugh at, but I've actually seen it happen because they're for-profit business essentially, and they want to learn how to keep the money flowing. And so they will do that, and that's the one advantage that we have if we're going to pay the ransom. And by the way, for the record, I always advise against paying the ransom.
Yeah.
I do not believe in taking that chance. And another thing is a lot of times, even when they give you back the decryption key through the ransom or whatnot, it doesn't immediately restore your system. A lot of times it will get you your data back, but you still have to reload operating systems and reload software and relicense software and do all that work anyways. So it's not that, it's not that panacea that everybody thinks it is, or the shot of penicillin, if you will. It's an easy way to get your data back, but the better way is to have a good immutable backup that you can recover from.
Not have it happen in the first place. Yeah. All right. Well, that's about all the time we have for this session. Thank you very much for your input and explanations, John. And thank you very much to Rubrik for your sponsorship. And thanks to all of you in the audience for listening in today.